Welcome back to season 2 of Energetically You, where we talk all things healthy habits, abundant mindset, and optimal wellness. I'm your host, Megan Swan, a mindset and wellness coach. I love helping women optimize their wellness through plant-based nutrition, movement, mindfulness, and mindset practices that having them feel more aligned with who they truly are and confident in their own skin. I'm the creator of the Sustainable Integrated Wellness Approach. I am also living in Mexico, and I have been for the last 12 years. At 30, I sold everything and went on my own eat, pray, love journey, if you will. And now at 42, I'm still on my first stop, loving life and feeling more empowered than ever before. This podcast is for incredible humans who are interested in feeling more aligned with who they truly are, confident in their own skin, and able to make more empowered decisions for themselves going forward in their future. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Energetically You. Today, I'm so excited to get to know this really fascinating woman a little bit better. Her name is Chelsea Quint. She is a trauma-informed, human-first business coach for solo entrepreneurs and small business owners. She's also a witch and infuses magic and spiritual practices into everything she does. She also hates writing bios about herself, so I appreciate that she wrote this one for my purposes. So she'll leave us off with a few other labels. Anti-capitalist, cat and corgi mom. She's a chef, wife, ride or die New Yorker, yogi, Schitt Creek fiend, and skincare enthusiast. I'm here with Chelsea Quint. I'm so excited to get to know you better. I found your account 6 months ago, maybe, and you've just shared such an interesting twist of aligned business ethics and trauma-informed, I would say emotional support for people, and then the whole witchy spiritual side as well. So to me, it's like this just beautiful marriage of all things that I really appreciate. So I wanted to hear your story and how you came to beautifully thread and weave all those things together.
So this month, as we are recording this, is my 5-year anniversary of taking on clients. So I've been doing this for 5 years. When I say this, I refer very broadly to playing in the entrepreneurial space. My business has had many different iterations. I've offered a wide variety of services from from breathwork services to EFT and kind of healing spaces to spiritual development spaces to health coaching. We actually are alumna of the same, both IIN graduates. So I started out health coaching, which is really the origin point of how I got to where I am today, because when I was starting out health coaching, like so many of us who start these businesses, right? I first came with this dream, this excitement, this enthusiasm of, oh my God, I could like work from my house and see my therapist in the middle of the day when I need to and have the flexibility. And this is like financially viable. I could actually help people and make money and live the way I want. Like it was this mind blowing. How could this be possible? How could this be real? Why is everyone not doing this moment? And then I started trying to get clients and build an audience and figure out how on earth I actually make this dream I have that I see other people living, that I see is possible. How do I do it? And so I set out, again, as I think so many of us do, to answer those questions. And I found a lot of folks who said, like, kind of spoke the spiritual language, kind of talked about being of service, kind of like seemed to be in alignment with a lot of my values. But when it came to the business practices they were using, It felt a lot like they were using spiritual jargon, like it is of what I'm doing is of service. Therefore, it's of service to be manipulative. It's of service to use fake scarcity to drive people to take action. It's of service to charge a ton of money just because I can, because then people are more invested. And so I started seeing all of these these practices that felt so gross in my body. But they were paired with this idea of like, but we're doing it for service, but we're doing it spiritually, but we're doing it in alignment, all of the language. And I just had so much cognitive dissonance over, I want to have what these people have. They're telling me they're doing it in a way that's good. When I try to do the things they're telling me, it feels terrible in my body. What the heck is going on? Like totally tied myself in knots. My brain was just so confused about whether what I was feeling was right or if I was just in a mindset block, if I was just inside of a limiting belief. And so that was kind of honestly like the first 3 years of my business. I did not succeed immediately. I made less than $30,000 a year the first 3 years of my business, each year. And I was really struggling to kind of try to figure out, how do I find success? How do I pay my bills? Not even like chasing a 10K. Like I was like, how do I pay my bills and stop having to like work these other jobs and do these other things to make ends meet? And I'd love to say like one day I had this intuitive awakening and I discovered blah. That's not really what happened. I entered a sales. That's not really it. I entered a sales training program that was kind of the same as everything else. The same as everything else I had done. It was better at teaching sales. It was better at teaching sales than everything else I'd done. But it was the same kind of women's empowerment, spiritual, like all of the things. But at the surface, it was pressure-based, fear tactics, manipulative marketing 101. And I did some of it. And it worked. And I was raking in the kinds of money that a lot of people make in it as a salary. And even at my worst, I was never like, the harm that I did was mostly inside of like using income claims and how much money I was making as a tactic to get people to hire me. Sometimes pain points. There were, the things that I was doing were less terrible than some, but ultimately they were less terrible than some, but ultimately I was doing things the way that I'd been taught because it worked. And beyond that, because I had looked for a different way and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find people having these conversations about how to effectively run an enrollment period, a launch, without digging into pain points and manipulating people and blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of one side of it, is I came to this moment of like, okay, this stuff works and it feels terrible in my body. Like every time I would go to write a post about how much money I was making as an attempt to get people to hire me, it just felt disgusting. It felt awful. And so essentially I decided to sell off at a huge discount everything I'd created before, took a big pause, took a big hit in my income, didn't really post or talk about much of anything, sell anything for about a year. And I had kind of recurring clients and people who knew me behind the scenes. Like the work I did with my clients was always rooted in this work. It was the front facing and the marketing where there was the disconnect. And so I took a really long pause to look at what can I do and like what is in integrity for me to do in my business practices and for me to teach. in my business practices. And to do that, I had to kind of go back and do an audit of what has worked in the last 5 years, what hasn't worked, really tuning into my body's awareness of what feels good, doesn't feel good, feels in integrity, doesn't feel in integrity, and have between that mixed with a lot of study of capitalism and the entire ecosystem, economic system that we're operating inside of, as well as I have a background in marketing. So pulling out all of that, understanding the psychology of why we buy things and consumerism, I kind of nerd out on all of those things and have ultimately folded that together into coaching and teachings that really my main mission is to prove we don't have to pressure and manipulate each other in order to get ahead financially, in order to have financial stability. Like, we don't have to carry that exploitation that is kind of the signature of capitalism into our businesses. And when we do things in a different way, we have the opportunity to change not just our clients' experiences, our customers' experiences, but also the broader business culture. Because if we prove you can make good money without grossness, then that opens up a lot of really exciting doors about like, okay, what then is possible? How can we actually shift the culture more broadly in the way business is done in the industry of marketing? Long-winded answer, and probably some loose threads in there, but
I love everything you just said. I definitely resonate with, chapter 1, the first 3 years. That was my chapter 1 was 2020. And I, went back and forth with various coaches and those that focused more on the masculine versus the feminine. But there was always everything you just mentioned in terms of tactics and launching and kind of this like boom bust cycle of the business. And as much as I tried, I had to find, it wasn't until I found someone that said, no, there is another way. Mm-hmm. Let's try this. And more than anything, helped me trust my inner knowing that, I have some semblance to decide like what could work and what does work best for me versus, trying to adopt somebody else's strategy. So I love everything you just said. And I'm curious, at what point did you bring the trauma informed into it? And I'm guessing that you've studied. I have only done like a very short trauma-informed yoga seminar once upon a time, which completely, a 3-hour workshop that completely transformed the dialogue that I used in my yoga teaching, which I don't honestly do that much anymore. But just sometimes we just are not, well, in marketing, arguably tries to be traumatic.
100%. I think there's no argument to it. It does. Period. Marketing. One of my favorite examples is at the very beginning of Mad Men. Have you ever watched Mad Men?
Oh God, love it. Like it's like many shows that I love, but I don't love that I love it. You know what I mean?
I relate completely. So at the very beginning, this is something I kind of rewatch periodically to light my fire of like, this is what we're trying to change. Because in the very first or second episode, it's at the very inception of the show, they are having these meetings about Lucky Strike, the cigarette company, and it's around the time when evidence shows these cause cancer. They are actually killing you. They're killing us. And it's an inside look at these rooms of white men trying to figure out, how do we convince people to buy them when we know they will kill them? Those are the roots of marketing practice. That's why we need a space that is trauma informed. That's why we need to question everything, because the roots come from rooms that were trying to sell us things that they knew would kill us. Like, so I remind myself of that periodically. And if ever anyone has had this feeling of like, marketing and selling and advertising feels so gross to me, yeah, the roots of the practice, which is something I like, also a yoga teacher, looking at the roots of what we're engaging in, I think is so important, because it gives us, one, it's important to honor where it comes from. And two, it gives us a sense of like what energy is in this lineage. And the energy inside the lineage of marketing is pretty terrible. So that did not answer your question, but as an aside, the trauma-informed piece, I came to my first understanding or first intro to the term trauma-informed was also in a yogic context. And it really resonated with me because I, as a survivor, have felt so triggered in a lot of yoga rooms. And so when I started my teacher training, in my application, one of the things that I noted I wanted to talk about, that I was interested in, was anatomy, yes, but also like nervous system and understanding what's happening for someone psychosomatically in the room. And so my curiosity in understanding our stress and trauma responses, our biology, is really, I mean, honestly, it started purely selfishly because I was essentially on a quest to figure out, how do I function and survive in a world that is so often
triggering,
activating for me. Yeah. Like when something that is like fine for me these days, but at a time wasn't, if I get an email these days, like it's from a client that feels, if there's like friction with a client, which happens sometimes, right? Like if there's friction with the client, or it used to be if my boss sent me an email, I like couldn't open it. I couldn't open the email, right? And so a lot of this study started long before I was an entrepreneur, other than teaching yoga classes, but like I wasn't really doing much to build. Yeah, I was leveraging the studio's presence. I started studying things around like, how do I do the basic human things of like respond to emails in a timely fashion, not totally shut down when my boss says, I want to talk to you, not freak out when the person I'm dating is like, we need to talk. Like it started in those sorts of like, how do I navigate day-to-day realities better? And then when I was around the time that I joined that fairly toxic sales program, one of the things that did contribute to my success was all of the nervous system work I had been doing, where it no longer felt terrifying to have people pay me higher numbers, to have 10 people join a program instead of 4, right? I had been slowly building my nervous system's capacity up to hold bigger numbers of people paying me a higher rate because I have more experience, because of this, that, the other, or more people joining an offering. And that, seeing that moment sort of like, because I saw that year, I started seeing my numbers in revenue, in all of my numbers start kind of pretty steadily ticking up. And I just got very curious about like, okay, what actually is creating the shift? One part was I started talking about money. We live in a capitalist world where that does often create movement. But one of the other bigger things, if I zoom out, is I was less scared, or I was more able to hold the discomfort of, okay, 10 people just signed up. All right. Or, okay, 20 people are going to be in this class that I'm giving a talk to, or someone wants to pay me $5,000 for this coaching program to help them develop their business. Like I had been playing with bigger numbers, so I was able to not shut down in the face of them. I was able to continue talking about them during my enrollment period. And so that's where, when I started like noticing and seeing the same trauma responses I would have like when I was dating inside of my business, that's where I started getting curious. Example, like I have an anxious attachment style. So when someone I'm dating doesn't respond to me immediately, there's a lot of like, should I text them? Should I say something? Should I say the perfect message? What should I do? Da, da, da. I would see the same thing happen inside of, okay, I just launched the offer. No one has bought it yet. What should I do? How do I say more? How do I reach out to people? Should I message them? Blah, blah, blah. And so it was in that kind of moment, that was probably around like year 2 or 3, when I started seeing those connections and started doing emotional freedom technique, practicing sort of breath and nervous system regulation tactics in those moments to expand my ability to hold the discomfort of the extreme discomfort of launching and being an entrepreneur and selling all the time. So that's how we got there.
Unknown. So tell me more about you using the title witch, and how long have you been doing that? Maybe you did it more tongue in cheek, but it's title that I'm planning on embracing more this year. So I'm curious.
Yeah, no, not tongue in cheek at all. Very serious. And something I've also been trying to claim more over the past couple of years. It first started when my sister had a Wiccan phase when we were probably like 12 and 14 or something like that. But it's something that I first really came to. I didn't use the word witch, but I first came to my witchy practices when I started my yoga teacher training. Because I started training, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to teach asana. But I started it also because I had found magic inside of yoga spaces that I couldn't describe. And then when I found the philosophy sections and the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita and understanding the so many of the richer aspects of yoga, I love asana, and the other limbs are just lovely. That I started to understand the power of ritual. And in my mind, rituals are spells, right? And I mean, writing something is a spell, an Instagram post can be a spell, an email can be a spell. And I think that especially, I fancy myself a bit of a recovering perfectionist and attempting recovering workaholic. Like, I still work too much, and it's hard when you love what you do. But because of all of the conceptions we're all kind of raised with about what work is and business and being professional, I've found that it can be hard not to like forget how to be human. And a lot of my clients experience this, where it's like when they're talking to me, can explain what they do and know how important it is and feel so excited about it and be so lit up. Then they try to write about it for an Instagram post, or they try to write up a bio or a pitch to do a podcast or whatever it may be. And it feels like they're trying and it's contrived and it's, they lose the magic to it. They lose the human to it. And so for me, I mean, witchiness comes in throughout my life. But one of the spaces where I really started committing to it was inside of the way I relate to my work. Because when showing up to a session or a podcast interview or writing an Instagram post, whatever, things that are like normal kind of businessy things, when I look at it as, what spell do I want to cast? What is the ritual here? It creates this, there's this term, this term that's actually used in like studying cults. So that's an aside, but this term of ritual time, this is cults and religion, not just cults, but this idea of ritual time, which is where using various practices, smells, actions, words, incantations, we create this different space, right? It's the space of, there's ritual time in a yoga class. We all take off our shoes. We're in different clothes. Maybe there's incense burning. The music is different. The lights are much more dim than you would normally be in a room full of strangers, right? Like it's this ritual moment where our consciousness is in a different place. We get to think differently, be a little different. And so to me, that's a lot of what being a witch is about creating these sacred, special pockets of ritual time based on whatever area of your life you're playing in. So sometimes ritual time is in the self-care space around a bath or around, I feel like such a cliche being like my hot water with lemon in the morning, but like, it's true. I do drink hot water with lemon in the morning. And like, I speak words into it of like what I want for the day. I speak words into it around what I want from that water and asking for it to nourish me. And those moments just create a lot more intention, a lot more richness, and I think a lot more nourishment in the simple moments of my day, as well as in what I'm creating for the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So what are some other, maybe, do you do any rituals around the moon or like more monthly rituals opposed to daily?
I would love to say that I am super diligent about my lunar practices, and I am not. So to the fellow imperfect witches, same, right there with you. I'm honestly more intentional with my cycle, which often is synced up to the moon, but not exactly. So it's a lot more around like when I'm getting ready to bleed and bleeding, like slowing down, reflecting on the month prior and around what worked. Really, it's very simple. Like what worked, what didn't, what nourished me, what depleted me, and then how do I take that information and move forward? So really, really, really simple. And that is easier for me than remembering the calendar dates. Even though there are so many apps we could follow now, I know, but I don't have, I have 2 notifications on my phone and the moon is not one of them. Or 2 apps that give me notifications. So I do love lunar rituals. For me though, gathering in circle is always what's felt much more sacred, around the moon. And I don't have that circle where I live. I had a circle in, before I moved a few years ago, but I haven't found that circle, and now we're in pandemic times and it is harder than normal to gather in groups. And virtual is just not the same to me for that kind of experience. But
yeah, I agree. It's not quite the same, but I feel like by the end of the year, we'll be gathering like we
I hope so. I hope so. May that spell take root.
So how can people work with you if they're resonating with everything that you've just said?
With my rambles and musings. So I work with folks one-to-one in a fairly limited capacity because I'm a fairly low energy human being. Limited as in just like I don't take on that many one-to-one clients, but I take on one-to-one clients who either have or want to have businesses that are shaping our culture in a positive way without sacrificing revenue. And I also do group spaces and workshops. I'm a very messy creator. And I tried to fight that for a long time, but it's the way that I create. So I have workshops that pop up around specific topics inside of business and nervous system regulation, mostly in context of business, but also outside of it. And I run small groups. So all the details are, my Instagram is pretty much the best place for that, which is at Chelsea.Quint, because all the things show up there.
Perfect. Well, I'll have that all in the show notes. One last question I thought of asking you earlier, and I'm going to loop back because I know that you're so well versed in everything capital. What's your perspective on quote unquote influencers versus the classic giant brands? Like, are they somehow morally superior, or is it just more intrinsic and icky? Maybe not aware that it's happening.
I think that last part, that they're maybe not aware that it's happening, is a big part of this. I am one of the things that I'm committed to because a lot of my work is critical. A lot of the content I put out is critical. And whenever one of the things I'm committed to is not critiquing a particular person or brand or creator. Like, that's not the point. The point is pointing out and critiquing the status quo. Because the reality is the status quo is manipulation, pain points, pressuring people to buy, focusing on our bottom line over whether our product or service will actually help someone, a power dynamic between the creator and the consumer that is, I think, problematic. Like, the norm creates harm more times than not. And the norm I'm speaking of is like business and marketing practices. And that harm might be, if we're looking at a big brand, like, I am very interested in the fast fashion space. So like a big brand like Forever 21, right? Or H&M or Zara, any of them, they cause harm to our planet. And they are concerned with, I don't know off the top of my head how many, if any of those are public companies, but they are either concerned with, much as their PR may say otherwise, their business practices show they are concerned with creating revenue, creating ever increasing, ever growing profits for either their shareholders and or stakeholders if they're private. I don't know if those companies are public or private off the top of my head. And they are doing so at the expense, without concern over whether you have too much stuff in your closet, whether you are stressed about not knowing what to wear, whether you are feeling pressure to try to keep up. And they're also doing it without concern about the planet and the impacts that they're causing and how long polyester garments are going to be on the planet that will outlive many of us. So influencers, where do they fit into that puzzle? I mean, it's a spectrum, right? I don't think any influencers are evil. I don't know. Maybe some of them are. I don't know. I think that it is hard not to get seduced by fame, money, and power. There's a lot of messaging from what I refer to as like the boss babe space and the bro marketing space, but there's a lot of language in those spaces about how we need more power, we need more money in the hands of good-hearted women, because when more women have the money, they do better things with it. And there is data to show that there's a truth to that. Women-owned companies typically hire more diversely, pay better, have more humane, I would argue, like vacation and time off and maternity policies, and flexible, all sorts of things. And there is extensive data that shows that at a certain point, more money does lead to less generosity. More money does lead to, right, and more self-interest and self-interested actions. These are broad strokes and speaking about like broad generalizations. This doesn't mean that everyone who has money is evil. It doesn't mean that money is the root of all evil, all of the idioms. Like, that's not true. I do believe in wealth and enough money to live well for everyone. It's hard to stick to your values. And I don't really think that we have models of how to engage with big brands, how to play in a sort of a fame space, how to play in that space in a way that really, really, really upholds integrity. We do have there's a beauty influencer I really like, Charlotte Palomino. Charlotte Parler is her, Charlotte Parler is her Instagram. And she, I think, is an example of good influencer. She uses her platform to talk politics. She uses her platform to create social change and move forward justice initiatives. And so I do think there is a move toward kinder, more human influencer practices.
A well-rounded answer for sure. I think like it's just also a bigger conversation about social media being highly curated, right? So, well, later I'll get you to send me the link of that, because I don't know who that influencer is. Now I'm curious. But I agree that there are some that are, very clearly much more committed to being critical. And to your point, pretty much no one is doing all of the background research to follow up. And so ultimately we go a lot by our instincts. And I seem to think that those of us who are doing practices to hone our instincts and our intuition might be in a better place moving forward, because there's only going to be more smoke and mirrors, and it's going to be faster and more and more overwhelming. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was a pleasure. I look forward to following you more in your journey and your woke criticisms. And I feel like we'll be in touch. Is there anything you wanted to, any parting last words for this afternoon, Chelsea?
The parting last word is that when we enter these spaces being, how do I make my business more ethical? How do I make more ethical purchasing decisions? How do I be more trauma informed? All of like that kind of nexus. How do I be more woke, but actually? I often see a shame response happen of, oh, I didn't know that thing I did before was wrong, but I did it, and now I feel shame. And within that, there's often this then paralyzing response of, now I can't move forward in my business or with what to buy or with who to hire, because I'm so scared of doing it wrong, of causing harm, of making the wrong choice. And so ultimately, the thing I want to close with is, none of us are doing this perfectly. Honestly, kind of none of us really know what we're doing at this front edge of figuring out how to do business and consuming and social media differently. If you are brave enough, aware enough, awake enough to be exploring here, you are leading in some way. Whether you have a public platform or not, you are leading. There's not a rule book here. It doesn't exist yet. And so when we are leading and pioneering things, we're going to make mistakes. Part of that process is going to be making mistakes, learning something new, owning that we made a mistake, having the nervous system and trauma support to be able to regulate around like, I screwed up. Okay. How do I make any reparations, any repairs, and how do I move forward? The point isn't perfection. It's getting curious, learning, and continuing to try to move forward in a way that is more positive, more regenerative, and less harmful in the way you walk. It's really like the yogic path, like minimize harm, maximize impact. I'm taking some liberties there, but being gentle.
It's a big conversation, and I love how you wrapped it up. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for listening to Energetically You. I hope that this episode has helped you to tune into your natural energy sources so that you feel more energized and focused throughout your day. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a second to rate and review. Each review helps us to help more ambitious women just like you accomplish their goals. Don't forget to take a screenshot, share it on social or in your Instagram stories, and tag me at Megan Swan Wellness. See you soon.